What's going on, everybody? Back at it again with our first episode, our inaugural episode of the Changavi Report. For those of you that start freaking out, like, whoa, you started a new show and didn't even tell us, no advance notice. Okay, let me explain. So, you know how we did the episodes on Afghanistan and on 9/11, respectively? Those were kind of like news episodes, and they kind of broke rules of the Changavi show, right? They went beyond 40 minutes. They were more in depth. They were focused on one topic. So I started thinking, like, why don't we just categorize those in their own right? And so I was like, all right, let's make a Changavi report where we talk about current events and issues that are plaguing the minds of those that are uh young and old. If you listen to this and you're old, shout out to you. So I figured, well, there's been one issue that's really been rocking the surface of the United States of America over, well, I mean, since really practically the 1960s. And that's abortion. And I feel like people, when they talk about abortion, get really political or really side with one side or the other. So, my goal with this episode is to be able to break down those divisions and kind of look at abortion for what it is and why it's political and how it affects us in religion and some of the root causes of it and also some of the solutions like sex education, which we're going to talk about a little later. So I figured we could dive in and delve into all aspects of abortion, but I feel like in order to have this conversation, you have to learn about the background of abortion first. And so I figured what a better place to start than the background. So why are we talking about abortion now? I think that's a critical part of this conversation. We're talking about this because Texas recently passed this thing called the heartbeat bill, which basically means that within the first 6 weeks, or abortion, so it's basically the first abortion ban to take place that uh basically bans abortions from taking place after 6 weeks. So basically after the fetal heartbeat is uh is detected, you can't get an abortion. That's the new kind of rule in Texas that's going to be put into place, I believe, at the beginning of next year, if I'm not mistaken. So that's the current rule. So let's start even further back. What is abortion? Abortion is basically you when a woman gets pregnant and for whatever reason she cannot have the baby, whether that be medically, whether that be due to other extenuating circumstances, whether that be to economic circumstances, she decides that she cannot have the baby. And so the way to get rid of the baby is by aborting. So what do is you go to a clinic, there's like a surgery done. It's pretty standard, nothing too crazy. And the baby, if it's a certain age, it shouldn't be that complicated. And medical technology has gotten to the point where abortions are considered to be very safe, and oftentimes there's limited side effects. So that's what an abortion is. So I basically wanted to figure out, why is that political? Like, shouldn't is it? It feels simple to me. Um, but the background is, so Texas passed this bill and it came back into the news cycle again. The heartbeat bill, like I was referring to earlier. So the bill was also, as you may have expected, was outlined by all men, more specifically white Republican men. Which, I mean, in this day and age, is that like unexpected? Like, oh, okay. Wonder who the culprit is. Oh, white man. Is he above the age of 60? Yes. Okay, makes sense. And the law also, on top of this fetal heartbeat detection uh, and abortion being banned past that point, it allows any person to sue anyone that induces an abortion. So anyone that is responsible for the procedure itself. And so I'm talking doctors, I'm talking clinics, I'm talking facilities that basically support abortion and allow the abortions to happen past the 6 week point. You are allowed to sue them. Basically, you could be an independent party and sue these people. It doesn't matter what stage it is. And essentially, the law bans abortion at any stage of the process because of the fact that you're allowed to sue anyone that induces abortion at any stage, really. So at a certain point, you're delving into the territory where the heartbeat doesn't even matter, right? Because you are allowed to sue anybody that is giving abortions out. Like it doesn't really make sense. So even the heartbeat thing is kind of a lie. So basically, it's just outlawing abortion. It's the strictest abortion regulations that have been seen in this country for a while. Um, and recently, Governor Greg Abbott, as of literally a day ago, announced another bill, which basically further enhances abortion restrictions, and basically says he basically banned abortion-inducing drugs 7 weeks into the pregnancy. So, like that's things like things that allow the baby to be aborted. You are not allowed to take those drugs. So it's kind of an extension to this heartbeat bill, semi expected considering the strict regulations of the heartbeat bill itself. So these regulations have gone into place in Texas. A lot of people are really pissed off about it. Um, a lot of people are like, "What is this?" It's against like everything. Like you can't, government shouldn't be regulating this. Blah blah blah. So I figured, I was like, okay, I want to have a fair look at this. I don't want to just shit on Greg Abbott and what's going on in Texas. I want to look at both sides. And the way I look at a political issue is very simple. And I'm taking you guys through my thought process because I think it's important. So the way I look at a political issue is I look at it I look at it from both sides. So I'm like, all right, pro-choice and pro-life are the two camps when it comes to abortion. There's no real gray area. If you're in a gray area when it comes to abortion, I don't really know what you're thinking. There's not really a gray area. It's either you do it or you don't. Like it's very simple. Um, and I was like, all right, I'm going to convince myself of both. I'm going to look for the strongest arguments in both and try and convince myself of both so that I have kind of the perspective as to where people are coming from with both sides of the issue. So I figured I would take you guys through my thought process and do the same. So let's present the pro choice arguments of abortion first. Why should you be pro choice? Why should you be pro choice? Well, let's start out with what is pro choice. Pro choice for abortion essentially means that you want to give women the choice of keeping the baby and deciding to have the baby, or having the option and the alternative to abort the child. So they have the kind of, they have the choice to do whatever it is they need to do. Flexibility. Um, that is what pro choice means. A lot of people think pro choice is, oh, I'm pro abortion. It does mean that, but it also means you are giving the woman the choice to do whatever it is she wants. I want to make that very clear. So the main arguments from this side of the pact, or this side of the conversation, are that number one, it has social implications when it comes to gender equality. So what this means is basically people believe that if you go pro-life and you don't allow women the ability to have abortions, that they are being put down in society because of the fact that they are because of the fact that their bodies are being regulated. So it basically means it has social implications according to pro-choice individuals. Number two, the second main argument is safety concerns. So basically, what they're trying to say is, yeah, even if you ban abortion, like what they're going to do in Texas, women are going to get abortions anyway, right? It's going to happen. It's an inevitability. You are just when you ban abortions, though, you just make sure that people are doing it unsafely, which is wrong. And by that logic, people are just going to be hurting themselves, right? And you don't want that. You don't want women to be hurting themselves. Like there was an age, in the early 20th century where women were having coat hanger abortions, which are incredibly dangerous, and you do not want that to happen. So I think you safety concerns are definitely one of the arguments, and one of the strong arguments for the pro-choice side is that even if we're going to do this, even if we're going to ban it, that we need, like, people are just going to hurt themselves. So what's the point? And the last argument that the pro-choice side has or one of the main arguments, but I'm going to call it the last argument, is separation between church and state. So what that means is in government, typically in the United States of America, it's written that there should be a separation between religion and religion interfering with the government. Basically, because of the fact that in Europe, when the original people who came from Europe and settled in the 13 colonies basically realized that the Catholic Church and the church had too much control over what was going on in the government. And after the revolution, America wanted to be a secular government, so they wanted to separate the religion aspect of things. They say you can believe whatever you want, separate the religion from the actual laws that we're going to make, because we need to make the laws fair and equal. Pro-choice argues that precedent. So basically what they're saying is hey, there is no separation between church and state at this point because of the fact that a lot of people who are pro-life, and this is a generalization, a lot of people who are pro-life are very religious and tend to be more Christian. And so pro-choice people tend to think that their Christian values are impeding on the government. So basically what they're saying is look, there is a separation, or there's no separation between church and state when you implement these pro-life rules. So we're basically going against what our founding fathers said, which is kind of crazy to think about. So those are the pro-choice arguments when it comes to abortion. So you present one side, right? Those are their main arguments. And I'm not, okay, I want to make this very, very clear. I didn't do this earlier. I want to make this very clear. I'm not going to reveal my politics and my take on abortion till the end, because I want to remain unbiased. I want to have both arguments and a level conversation about both sides before we can get into what I believe. And yeah, so I just figured that I want to separate my opinion from the facts, and I want to present the information accurately and efficiently so that you guys have the information right here in front of you as to what is going on. So I will not be revealing how I feel about all this. I know I usually do, and you guys are like, oh my God, like blah, blah, blah. But I want to keep it kind of safe until the end. Because I feel like abortion is a very divisive issue, and I want to make sure that both sides are heard. Okay. Let's go to the pro-life arguments for a second. So pro-life essentially means that you do not want to give women the choice of having an abortion. You want all women to have the babies, all women to have babies when they're pregnant. So you do not want to give women the choice of being able to get rid of the baby. You want them to all have the baby. Of course, I believe there are exceptions when it comes to pro-life. I believe there are a lot of people who are like, have the baby unless it's like rape or incest or something crazy like that. There are stipulations, but most pro-life people believe that you should have the baby if you decide to get pregnant and have it. And you should have to live with the consequences of, what you did, essentially, is what they're saying. Some of the main pro-life arguments are, number one, as soon as the sperm and the egg join together, you have created genetic material, which basically means you are killing a baby from the jump. That's the argument. So they're arguing basically as soon as genetic material is created, as soon as the sperm and the egg join together after sex, you are basically killing a human, because there's DNA that forms as early as, whatever it is, a week, or I don't really know the scientific terms, but that's one of their main arguments when it comes to science. It's like, well, genetic material equals a human, so you're basically killing a baby. Okay. So that's one of the main arguments that they provide. Another one of the main arguments provided on the pro-life side, and this tends to be one of their bigger points, is that abortions are elective, meaning that you have a choice to get an abortion or not, right? And a lot of people are making these choices to have abortions because they want to make their lives easier. It's not necessarily due to a medical concern. It's not necessarily due to anything. It's due to the fact that, oh, my life circumstances won't allow me to have a baby, so I'm going to kill it, is essentially how the pro-life side thinks. And so they basically believe that abortions are elective, and uh, why should people just be making their lives easier, by just killing babies? Like that is the way that they're thinking. It's like, if you don't want to do it, then don't go have casual sex, right? Which leads to that whole loop of a conversation, which is, you know, that's a show for another day. Um, Another main argument that I saw perusing many pro-life sites and violating my search history. Um, this is an interesting one. I actually think it's a very interesting argument. So the main feminists, and this was actually like written on multiple sites. The main feminists of the early 20th century, for those of you that don't know, were Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony. They basically fought for the right for women to vote in this country in the in the late 1800s and then early 1900s, and then they both passed away eventually, and then the 20th Amendment was passed. So these two were the main feminists. They basically birthed this modern wave of feminism, and they both hated the idea of abortion. Okay, so they were both pro-life. They didn't believe in it. They were both also very heavily Christian. So if they hated the idea of abortion, you should hate it as well, because they were feminists. So why should you like the idea of abortion? That is an argument that the pro-life side has presented. It's more of a, historical precedent type of argument that is. So I thought that was an interesting argument. And I think the last argument is, I wrote it as God wouldn't want it this way, meaning basically that a lot of pro-lifers tend to be very religious, tend to be more involved with Christianity, in whatever sect that they are involved in, whether that be Catholicism, whether that be Christianity, whatever. So, and in those texts, it is written that, abortion is illegal and abortion is immoral and all of these things. So a lot of pro-lifers tend to believe that, so God doesn't want it this way, so we have to make sure that people don't want it this way. Or so we have to make sure that, the government like instills those values. So that is the pro-life argument. So I delivered both sides, pro-choice and pro-life. Both have decent arguments, okay? And again, I'm not going to reveal my personal politics. I'll go on a little rant at the end. So don't worry for those of you that are like, is he one side or the other? Well, you'll have to find out. Or you could just fast forward to the end, but we'll see. But before I get to my side, I need to deliver all of this information. So those are the two kind of sides of the argument, right, when it comes to abortion. But this doesn't answer the question that I had. I had this question in my head when I first looked at this issue, when I first saw what was happening in Texas, when I saw what was happening in Alabama early last year. I was like, why the fuck is abortion political? Why is this important? Why are people fighting about this? Where does this come from? What is the root of abortion's foundations within politics? Like, I feel like this is just something that states should come up with, and there shouldn't really be nationwide ruling, right? I feel like it's just like, states, you do your thing, abortion is what it is and what you believe it to be. Why are we fighting over this? Okay, so that comes to my next question. Why is abortion political? Okay, it's a long story, but we'll start with what the statistics that we have now. Polls are showing right now that abortion is one of the most divisive issues in this country when it comes to social issues. Same-sex marriage isn't even this divisive. Same-sex marriage actually is one of the least divisive issues in this country. It's almost 70-30 at this point. According to the latest polls taken last year, 70% of people are pro same-sex marriage and 30% obviously anti. So yeah, that used to be also one of the more divisive issues. But now it's abortion. Abortion is the extremely divisive issue in this country. Polls show, like I said, one of the most divisive social issues. 49% of people, as of 2020, are pro-choice. 47% are pro-life, and 5% are undecided. This is 2 percentage points we're talking about here. This is nothing. It's practically even. And the 5% could go, 2.5 here, 2.5 there. You're basically evening the score at that point. It's an incredibly, incredibly divisive issue. And I was thinking about why this is divisive. Where is it divisive? So you can divide the United States of America into like four pieces, right? You have the West Coast, you have the Midwest, you have the South, and you have the East Coast. The West Coast, the foundations of the West Coast, if you think about it, are socially liberal, right? Manifest destiny, driving out to the West to chart your own territory, to make your own way, make your own path, no rules. Like San Francisco in the 1840s, 1850s was a town of no rules. Like we were the original Las Vegas. What happens in San Francisco stays in San Francisco. I mean, you literally go back and read old history books. There were brothels in the street. It was just filled with miners who were trying to get it big with gold and all of these things. So, yeah, is a big it's a town. It was a town of no rules, and that's really what the West Coast population boom took place because of the gold rush, and because there were people just mass migrating here to start new lives and have no rules and have basically do whatever they want. And that's what the West Coast is built on. West Coast is built on being socially liberal, and San Francisco is arguably one of the most progressive cities in the world, right? So that makes sense. The West Coast tends to be more pro-choice. The East Coast, similar, right? I mean, the East Coast is, yes, more rooted in tradition. There's definitely more churches. They've been around for longer. You would expect them. They are slightly more conservative. They're not like the, hang loose, relax West Coast. It's more button up. It's more button down, kind of go to work type mentality. But it's the East Coast is also tends to be liberal. You have a lot of big cities congregated in one area, and what happens when you have big cities? You tend to have more liberal people. So I'm talking, Boston. You have Boston, Philadelphia, New York City, and Washington D.C. all within 7 hours of each other. Yeah, you're gonna have a lot of liberal, kind of. You're gonna have a lot of you're gonna have a lot of liberal values within those areas, and that's that comes with the territory. That's why you look at the East Coast and it's all blue, because you have major cities of finance and various things right there, and they're all congregated within a certain area. So the East Coast also tends to be more liberal. So the West Coast and the East Coast may be different in terms of mentality, but they're both liberal when it comes to social issues. Then you have the Midwest. The Midwest is interesting. The Midwest kind of goes either way, right? And that's why you look at the Midwest and you're looking at the Midwest and you're like, holy crap, like they're always the deciding factor in these elections, because the coast go blue, the South goes red. Where's the Midwest going? Because the Midwest has influences from everywhere. The Midwest has influences from the West. The Midwest has influences from the East and the South. So you kind of get this weird melting pot of people in the Midwest, of like people who are socially conservative. It does tend to be a little bit more socially conservative, lean socially conservative in the Midwest. And, and so hence abortion is, looked down upon in that area of the country. Christianity is very popular in the Midwest and in the South. And of course, you have to get to the South, which is known as Republican territory. It's red, very conservative, very rooted in Christianity, all of these things. So different parts of the country have different mentalities, and we both live on coasts, and a lot of media outlets live on the coasts. So there is a lot of reporting in our ear that's like, oh, liberal, conservative, liberal, but no one really has a feel for what the middle of the country is like. And that is the key to this whole abortion puzzle, which is like, why is abortion political? Because let me get into this. This whole abortion being political goes back to the 1970s, and the Christian right. So the Christian right was basically this big group of people located mostly in the Midwest and the South, who were originally Democrats. So for those of you that don't know, Democrats were a very socially conservative party. They were pro-slavery in the 1800s. And they were very socially conservative for a long time. The Democrats were kind of the modern day, quote unquote, Republicans. I don't want to say they were the Republicans because they were pro-slavery and shit, but the Democrats have their own crazy history. And so they were, in the past, they were, pro-slavery, and then they eventually, became more socially conservative. But as time went on, Democratic candidates became younger and they became more socially liberal, and they basically formed into the modern day Democrats that you see today. Right. And that started basically in the 60s with Kennedy. And, And he kind of flipped the script a little bit. And then you had Lyndon B. Johnson, who also flipped the script, with the Civil Rights Act and all the Voting Rights Acts. So Democrats are flipping more to the left. And a lot of people in the South were Democrats. They were called the Southern Democrats because they were very pro, being socially conservative and all of these things. And the Democrats were that. But when the Democrats started turning left, you have this whole group of Southern Democrats who, a lot of which are the Christian right, that have no political home. So they essentially kind of don't know where to go or where to vote. Then along came this guy by the name of Jerry Falwell in the 1970s. This is where he really started to gain notoriety. And he was basically like a celebrity TV/radio preacher. So basically he would preach sermons over the radio and present himself over the television, and deliver these sermons that were incredibly, Christian in nature and incredibly conservative in nature. And the Christian right tended to kind of follow him because he represented their values more so than, any of the political candidates at the time. And so he was the one that basically used his sermons to try to mobilize the Christian right and get them involved within politics. And so suddenly you have this huge group of Southern Democrats who were Democrats who don't really have a political home, that are kind of just following Falwell, who tended to be more conservative. So they ended up going to the Republicans. And the Christian right really brought their issues with them to the right. So what I mean by that is the Christian right had particular issues that they wanted to focus on. Right. They weren't necessarily like, oh, like we're, war hawks, or like we're into deficit and this, that. They brought two main issues to the conversation, which were same-sex marriage, for the most part. Two main issues. Same-sex marriage, we're anti that. I'm talking about the Christian right. And pro-choice. Or sorry, pro-life. So those were the two issues that they were like, no, like we are anti-abortion, we are anti-same-sex marriage. And they basically brought that with them to the Republican Party. And so suddenly you are having these conversations about very socially, or you were having these conversations about social issues because the Christian right, which is a pretty big minority of Southern Democrats that were kind of left for dead, sort of moved to the Republican side. And now you're like, oh, it's, abortion is a thing. And you are talking about it more so than ever. And yeah, the Christian right continues obviously to exist today. You might have heard of them in 2016, the evangelicals, they were like very pro-Trump, all of these things. They, organized in all sorts of ways through grassroots. The media has also heavily assisted, there's a lot of Christian media that's heavily assisted them and mobilized them to have the power that they do today. And their messaging is everywhere. It's like you think of Westboro Baptist, like all of these things. It's literally because of the media that the Christian right is even relevant. And they're big. They were a big group, and I'm sure that they still are big. I don't really necessarily know the size, but the Christian right is still very much a relevant force in this country and a relevant minority force in this country, so that these issues are being talked about. Without the Christian right, I don't think you're necessarily talking about abortion or same-sex marriage in the way that you are, in the way that you did, in the 80s, in the 90s, in the 2000s, all of this stuff. So same-sex marriage and abortion were basically brought to the conversation because of the Christian right. And so why is abortion political? Well, one of the main reasons is the Christian right. And the Christian right, of course, has their, they stretch their messaging to all sorts of different areas of politics, whether that be, whatever values they may have. Death penalty is one of them and all of that stuff. But abortion is the main topic. Abortion is the number one topic that they basically have focused most of their energy towards and have really dialed in on, is abortion. So you're talking about religion. We talked a lot about the Christian right. We talked a lot about how there's a lack of separate. Clearly, there seems to be a lack of separation between church and state if the Christian right get what they want, right? So let's talk about abortion and religion. I think this is very important. I think this is a super important issue because abortion and religion, there's so many different religions in this world. It's not just Christianity. You can't tell me and sit here and be like, oh, well, Anuj, it's just the Christian right. Like, like every other, like other religions must just get on with it. No, that's not true. I think, and this was kind of one of the conclusions that I drew from this whole research piece was like, I think the more religious you are, the more you tend to delve into the pro-life conversation. I really do believe that. and several different religions. I do believe that, but to a certain extent, I also think that you can be religious and be pro-choice. I think it totally depends, but I do think that there is a trend that we see here. But when it comes to abortion religion, there are several different religions that have different stances on abortion, right? Um, so for one, I mean, you can start with the basics, right? Like the ones that we've talked about: Catholicism, kind of Mormons, what else? And I'm not speaking for all people who are Catholic or Mormon or whatever, right? But this just tends to be the natural trend. Catholicism, Mormons, Christians, they tend to be in the category of opposing abortion rights, right? And let's be real, Christianity is I believe still the majority religion in this country. We don't have enough, brown people to have Muslims or Hindus be the majority religion in this country, which are the two of the other biggest religions in the whole entire world, right? Islam and Hinduism, both of which have not infiltrated the United States of America just yet. I think it'll happen at some point. Okay, so there's that. So let's talk about Hinduism now. Hinduism also tends to land in this weird category of opposing abortion rights. But also there are texts where it is not necessarily looked at as a negative or stuff like that, but for the most part Hinduism lands in this category of opposing abortion rights. Hinduism basically states in several of its texts that the fetus becomes a living thing in the 7th month. So whatever you do past the 7th month is abortion and is illegal. So it stated that the fetus becomes a living thing in the 7th month. So basically, that interpretation is that don't abort after the 7th month. Classical Hindu texts, so I'm talking like Bhagavad Gita and all of these things, and the Vedas and stuff like that, are against abortion. But weirdly enough, it's very weird, and this kind of goes back to this whole issue of like women's rights and this whole conversation. Uh, they encourage Hindu texts, very classical Hindu texts, like fundamental Hindu texts, encourage abortion when it comes to having a daughter over a son, right? It's like that whole idea of child sacrifice, where it's like, like how in the 14th, 15th century in England, like, the monarchs would have like 10 kids because they would try to have a son, and they finally had the son on like the 10th try or whatever, right? It's literally that. So they were like, "Oh, you have a daughter? Oh yeah, you can abort her, but you just try for a son, right?" It's that whole idea of sexism and all of that stuff. That's a whole separate conversation that is pretty crazy. Like I said, Catholicism also opposes all abortion procedures. They probably have the most extreme policy when it comes to abortion, just opposing all abortions. They do recognize, and Catholicism does recognize morally legitimate procedures. So I'm talking like rape, incest, medically necessities, stuff like that. But other than that, fully against it. Islam's different. Islam's weird. So there isn't necessarily like a passage in the Quran that's like, okay, we are pro-choice or we are pro-life, right? It's a lot of interpretation, and it's widely different and dependent on the country that you're in. So Islam obviously there's a lot of Muslim majority countries in the world, particularly in the Middle East, that have their own respective abortion laws and the way that they believe in abortion. Most are against, but the Quran, when it comes to living things and fetuses, basically says that after 120 days, the soul becomes a legitimate soul, so it becomes a living thing. And so that interpretation is basically up to you. So I believe that's 4 months. I can do math too. So I feel like so it's again, it's another interpretation thing when it comes to religion, which I feel like is a lot of religion. There's no like explicit passages. I think Catholicism is the only one that's like, no. But Islam also does say when the mother's life is in danger, abortion is appropriate. But for the most part, tend to stay away from it, right? Okay. And then Buddhism is kind of another weird one where there are varying views when it comes to abortion. It depends on what kind of sect in Buddhism you believe. Tibetan view is basically like when you are harming life, it is a negative action, so you shouldn't do it. But again, Buddhism varies country to country, area to area, the way you practice, all of these things. So it totally just fluctuates with those two religions, with Islam and Buddhism. And feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. If you grew up in a Buddhist household, if you grew up in an Islamic household, and you have a different take on this whole matter, I would love to hear it. So, yeah, I mean, from my research, that's what it says. There's this whole, obviously, and now in modern society, everyone's got their own opinion, so it's totally dependent. But I'm saying like looking at the texts themselves. I'm talking Vedas, I'm talking Bhagavad Gita, I'm talking Quran, Bible, whatever it is. This is pretty much what is stated, right? So most of these religions tend to be more on the conservative side when it comes to abortion, and you can kind of see why the more religious you are, the more you tend to maybe shift to the pro-life conversation. Okay. So we talked a little bit about Islam and Hinduism and all of those things. Let's talk a little bit about abortion in the Desi community. Because, I am Desi. I am Indian. I'm half. No, that doesn't make sense. Hold on. No, okay. I'm full Indian, but I'm Indian American. Okay, I was brought up here. I lost the words for a second. I think this is important. If you're going to have this conversation, you got to talk about how abortion is in the micro. We talked about the big picture abortion. We talked about big picture abortion when it came to why is it political? How is abortion connected to religion? All of these things. Let's talk about abortion in the Desi community, because this is the biggest thing. From what I've seen, okay, and this is a lot of this is going to be opinion because this is my experience within the Desi community, not necessarily everybody's. I'm sure everybody's got their own take on abortion and political issues within the Desi community. I would love to hear it. Love to, have some discourse with you guys. But here's mine. Abortion in the Desi community. From what I've seen, I think most of our generation is cool with it. So, I mean, I think it's, most of our generation is pro-choice from what I can tell, at least from my own eyes. I think Gen Z and millennials tend to be very united on that front of like, okay, like we're pro just giving women the right to choose, do whatever they need to do. Like I feel like Gen Z and millennials are very on that. Just conjoined together when it comes to those issues. I feel like that is definitely there. But most Desis I've encountered are very pro-choice, particularly, mostly our age. Nothing crazy, but that's just most young people, I feel like at this point. Our parents, though, this is the interesting part. Our parents, they're so interesting. They do tend to be more conservative when it comes to abortion. I know a lot of Desi aunties and uncles that are more pro-choice, that tend to be in the more pro-choice conversation. And I don't think it's necessarily their fault, because I think in the society that they grew up in, I just talked a little bit about, the Hindu texts that a lot of them like grew up around, right? They do preach this whole idea of, keep the baby if you really keep the baby for the most part, but if you really have to, and if your life's in danger, maybe, consider getting an abortion, right? That's the kind of mentality that they grew up around. But they do trend towards the conservative side for the most part when it comes to abortion. And with our parents, I don't necessarily think it's their fault, because they grew up in a society that's very, very different than ours. So, it's pretty interesting. But I feel like due to religion kind of being such a major part of India, obviously like Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, Jains, it's such a religiously diverse place. India can be much more of a socially conservative place. And you look at this in Indian immigrants, it's really interesting. According to statistics, I remember looking at this in government class. Hindus and Muslims tend to be more blue. But I do feel like there is a significant minority within the Desi community that is very conservative, whether that be socially, whether that be both socially and fiscally. Most Desis are very fiscally conservative. That is a fact. Like I don't, I like it's not even a stereotype at this point. Like we're cheap. But like I think when it comes to social conservativeness, Desis definitely trend on that side as well. And I feel like abortion is no exception to that rule. Uh, you know, and I was looking at polls that were done in India, not necessarily here, because I grew up in the Desi community here. Polls done in India, many women view abortion as being a very disgraceful action. something that's shameful, something that's, not appropriate. Uh, so my question is like, how much does community have to do with our parents' mindset? I think it does. I think it's so many different areas. It totally does. The optics are so important in this community. And I think everyone who's grown up Daisy knows how important the optics are. Of course, there's a wide variety of examples that optics are key. Optics are this. Um, and our parents definitely think like, like Hassan pointed out the best, lo kya kenge, like what are people gonna think? Like, so like it totally depends, right? And if polls done in India are saying women view abortion as being this disgraceful action, like what are people gonna think type shit? Like, yeah, it's going back to that whole idea of the optics conversation. Like, oh, what is auntie gonna think? Oh, is Nyla auntie not gonna think I'm pure enough? Or is fucking Nitin uncle gonna think that, I can't marry his son because I had a one night stand that was a mistake? Like, shit like that. So it's going back to that whole conversation. That's a whole rabbit hole. I should just make a whole episode on Desi parents and the optics and just ugh, the the crazy things with that. Um, but yeah, I think our generation is very like I want to end it with this. I think our generation is very united in the Desi generation is very united on the fact that they're pretty liberal on most social issues. We grew up in this country. We kind of know the ropes a little bit more than our parents do, to be fair. And yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see maybe in a few years what if we just trend to be completely socially conservative. I don't know. I don't think that'll happen, but I think for the most part, Desi kids are very socially liberal, and from what I've seen. So yeah, that's abortion in the Desi community. But we talked a little bit about that, so now we got to talk a little bit about the solution, but also how we're completely approaching the solution wrong. So, for most people, they think the solution to abortion is education. And I totally agree with that. I'm 100% on board with education and being the solution. But the problem is we're approaching the solution wrong. We teach sex completely wrong. Okay? That's the thing. Sex education is the cure to abortion. Not even the cure, but just one of the solutions to making sure that teenagers and adults around the country, I'm talking about the United States, around the world, abortion is a whole gonna be that's gonna be hundreds and hundreds more years of work and technology and all this stuff. With us, sex education is one of the solutions, I would say, to getting us to a stage where we can have, first of all, educated discussions about abortion, but second of all, also know completely what is going on when it comes to the idea of abortion. So the solution of sex education is good, but we teach it wrong. We teach sex all wrong. I think that sex education can be a bipartisan issue, guys. I really do believe that. Yeah, I get it, right? Republicans are like, oh, we're all Christian, right? Like, yeah. And Democrats are like, Democrats, I feel like, should be down for this. If they're not, then you vote them out of office. Like, this is so dumb. I feel like sex education is the bipartisan issue. That this is where both sides can come together and be like, hey, we may not agree on abortion, but we'll teach both sides and we'll teach sex in a proper way so that our teenagers and our young adults are educated to the point where they have the issues down, right? And they know what to do and they know how to handle themselves in these situations. I'll speak from personal experience. Sex education in our school was trash. It was so bad. In elementary school, they taught us about deodorant. That was the first step to sex education. And then they showed us a video about AIDS from the 1980s, which was, completely unhelpful. I still don't know how, I had to do further research and then figure out how AIDS worked, not even in the 5th grade in high school, you know? And then they don't really teach you sex ed through middle school. And then you go to high school, and then they brought in this woman from Planned Parenthood who taught us how to put condoms on, and that was about it, right? Like, sex education in this country is shitty. It's terrible. Especially like in our area. Like it's not good. And I mean, my parents are way too awkward to give me the talk, right? They'll be like, "Oh, the birds and the bees," Like I am an immigrant child. I'm not going to get the sex talk. Like that's not going to happen. But like we need to like do something about improving our sex education in this country. I mean, and here's my solution, right? To improve sexual education in this country. Sex education primarily starts with us taking out stigmatization from sex. It's very simple, right? We have to start because right now in society, sex is so stigmatized, bro. It is so stigmatized. It is stigmatized to the point where like you have to like whisper sex, right? But like, why? Why? I feel like everybody does it. Like shit happens. Like that's the thing, dude, is like we have to stop acting like sex is fucking sacred. It's not. It's not some like thing you do when you get married for the first time. Like, dude, dude, it doesn't matter anymore. We live in a hookup culture. We live in 2021 where you can swipe for sex, literally Tinder, boom, ding, match, right? Like that shit exists. It happens. It is happening in front of us. We need to take that stigmatization from sex. Who is doing that right now? Who is taking the stigmatization out of sex? It's Alex Cooper. Okay. She's one of those people. One of my favorites. One of those people that's taking the stigmatization out of sex. Sure, the stigmatization of sex is starting to fade very slowly. Okay. By if that. But it is going to be a lot more effort from schools too, from our public education systems. I'm talking about the high school I went to. I'm talking about Saratoga High School. I'm talking about Monte Vista High School. I'm just going to start listing high schools in this area. Lindbergh High School, Cupertino High School, Homestead High School. I'm talking about y'all. We need to do a better job of sex education. Okay, that's whatever y'all are doing is not cutting it. People are not learning anything. We're just, confused for the most part. And by the time these kids get to college, they have no idea what the fuck they're doing. Okay, that's the problem. There needs to be an effort from public education to be better in that department and to maybe get people who are younger and, more with the culture rather than like 50-year-old Karens from, Idaho or wherever the fuck you get them from, right? Like that, this shit's not going to work anymore. Okay. You got to teach safety. You got to teach consent. You got to teach what STDs are, right? You don't want kids getting the chlamyds. Okay. Delve into relationships even. You got to talk about relationships. I feel like this is so key when it comes to sex. You have to talk about relationships. You have to talk about like all of these important things that lead to the action of sex itself, right? This is where you have to like kind of start sex education from. And you have to approach sex education not like it's some infectious ass disease. Like, oh, if you're going to have sex, then, you run the risk of this, 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 and this, and this, and this. Don't do it. It's like, haha, you're a teenager. LOL, I'm going to do it anyway. I'm horny. That's literally what teenagers do. That's what teenagers do. I'm thinking from the mindset of a teenager. Because I was one like 2 years ago, right? Like, kids don't care. So you have to approach the conversation of sex from a place of like love and like, hey, okay, I understand you're probably going to do this in the next couple of years. So let's talk about where it comes from, some of the safety you should surround yourself with, right? You have to approach the conversation from a different lens. You can't just approach it from, okay, you got to avoid it, but if you can't avoid it, here's a condom. Like that's pretty much sex ed in today's society. It sucks. It's terrible. But here's my other idea. And I'm talking to you, Alex Cooper. I'm looking directly in the camera because I know you watch this show. Why don't sex positive and sex content creators like you, for one, you are the main one. You get paid $60 million to do it. Why don't you guys create a new curriculum, like how you wish you were taught sex in high school, right? Sex education in high school. Why don't you guys create a new curriculum? Collaborate with teachers around the country. Maybe you could start with one school, collaborate with the school and write books or write, curriculum or lesson plans so that teachers and you guys and administration can work together to teach sex the way you wish you were taught, right? Because if you teach sex in a light that comes from a place of love and comes from a place of, look, we know you're going to do it. We know it's going to happen. Shit happens. Sex happens, whatever. You need to be able to have that conversation, right? And you want to have that conversation openly. It needs to be a two-way street. It can't just be me talking at you. And I think if you collaborate with people with high platforms, particularly people like Alex Cooper, who high schoolers look at and they're like, whoa, I want to be her, right? Like, people are going to listen to you. The conversations are going to become exponentially more popular. It'll happen. It'll happen. It's things like that that I feel like are going to enact real change. Creating safe spaces, allowing people who are very popular in the space to collaborate with teachers and collaborate with schools. I would love to see Alex Cooper collaborate with the school and talk about sex ed and all of these things and really come up with a good solution to approach a pretty awkward subject. If I'm being honest, I feel decently awkward talking about this right now to this camera because I'm afraid my mom will walk in here and be like, "What are you saying?" Um, yeah, but sex education and abortion are tied together. Whether you like it or not, right? I think people need to be aware of the risks when it comes to having sex. I think people need to be aware of the safety. And I think we need to have conversations more about relationships and more about, romantic relationships and all of these things. Uh, and I feel like if we teach, I'm not saying ban abortion, right? If you're thinking that, oh, you're just said sex education is the solution to abortion, no, it's not. It's the solution to educating people on like, hey, this is how abortion works. This is a possibility that happens when may have a thing in high school, one night stand, or even in college, or even later in life, right? Like it if you teach sex and abortion in this open and safe space, I think abortion can start to be looked at in a more positive light. I'm not saying like you're going to like skip around town and be like, "Hey, I got an abortion." Like, no, that's not going to happen, right? I'm not saying you're going to do that. You can keep your abortion as confidential as possible. For a lot of people, it's a very traumatic experience, and I get that, right? You're losing a child. Abortion can be looked at though in a more positive light and from a more understanding perspective rather than, oh, you got an abortion, like, oh my god, she's such a slut, right? Like instead of that you can have, oh, she got an abortion, whatever, move on, life happens, cool. That is the thing. Stigmatization of sex is really what this whole thing comes down to, and proper sex education I feel like is the solution kind of to abortion. And not to abortion, but a solution to coming at abortion from a different perspective and maybe, you know, being more understanding of it. I think that's where we need to head. And I feel like the abortion conversation is in a different lens. We are in a conversation of like, oh, are you pro-choice or are you pro-life? If you're pro-life, fuck you, right? If you're pro-choice, fuck you. Like that's the conversation we're at. We're not at the conversation as to like, okay, how can we come at abortion from a safe space where both sides, pro-choice and pro-life, feel like they can come together and be like, okay, we can approach sex from a friendly place, from a space with love and an open and safe space so that we can educate our youth, our teenagers, our young adults on the right decisions versus instead of just telling them abstinence, 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 no abortion, and then they secretly go get a coat hanger abortion and harm themselves, right? I would much rather have us be like just treating it with respect and safe and coming at it from a perspective of trying to educate our young ones. I think that's important, because sex ed did not work at our high school. I'm sorry. Sorry to the person who taught us too. It was really not very nice and not very good. So shout out to you guys. Shout out to South Bay Public High Schools for teaching sex ed horribly. Y'all are the best. But yeah, I feel like we can improve. And I feel like if we improve sex education, we improve the perspective on abortion, which makes everybody happy. Okay. So now it comes my opinion. Anuj's personal thoughts on abortions. Okay. I feel like if you know me, this is not gonna come as a surprise to you. Guys, this should be pretty obvious. I'm pro-choice. Okay. No, like for all you people that were like gripping your fists, like, oh, is he pro-life? He's mentioning pro-life arguments. He might be pro-life. Time to cancel him. No, I'm not. I'm pro-choice. I'm pro-choice. Okay. I firmly believe, I don't believe in any of this stuff of like, oh, like, we should, like, life is created with genetic material. No, life isn't created until there's like an actual human being there. Okay. Which is like 6-7 months into the pregnancy. I also believe that women should have the choice. Like, I feel very icky. I think about it if I was a woman, right? I would feel hella icky if some white man was signing some law into fucking legislation being like, hey, You have to think this way, and you cannot abort your baby. Ha ha. Signed, Reverend Jedediah Smith. Like, fuck that. Fuck you, Jedediah. I don't want you regulating my body. Like, that's how I feel, right? I'm a dude. I can't even, like, imagine what women must be feeling. Like, I would be fucking irate. Yeah, I would be pissed. So, absolutely, I'm pro choice. Women should have the choice to do whatever they want. Women should have the choice to, you know, abort if they want to, keep it if they want to. Why should we get in the middle of what tons of women in the world want to do? Like, I don't give a fuck. You know, it's literally it's very simple. Pro-choice is just flexibility at the end of the day. It provides flexibility, funds, and safety. Okay, the funds are going to Planned Parenthood and abortion clinics around the country where, you know, you're allowed, or where they're allowed to induce abortions, and they have the funds to provide the right sex education, get STD tested, and all these things. And that's important. We need that. We need sex education within society. Sex ain't sacred, Republicans. Well, some Republicans believe, you know, are Christian and they lose their virginity at marriage. It's not sacred anymore, guys. It's not. Okay. It's not the 14th century. All right. We're not, you know, King Henry V and Mary Anne, right? Like this shit is over. Yeah. And personally, I am very, like, I'm very pro-choice. And like, I just firmly believe that women should have the choice to do whatever they want. And yes, 100%, I do think it has social implications, like I mentioned earlier, of, you know, social justice, or not social justice, but like social standing, in that, you know, women should not be regulated by the government. Like, if men can do whatever the fuck they want and go fuck whoever they want, like, you know, they should, like, why should women have to pay for those bullshit mistakes? Like, I don't believe in that. I'm very, yeah, you know, I'm one of my main stances in the world is all about equality, and like giving men and women equality in particular. I don't necessarily believe in income equality, but like, I'm talking about like like people. People should all have the same access to things. People should all, you know, be treated equally. I firmly believe that. When it comes to income, like, you know, whatever. I don't really, you know, I don't necessarily believe in that. But when it comes to people, yeah, people should be treated equally. And don't see why, I don't see how, you know, not treating, but I don't see how, like, women, you know, being regulated by the government is equal in any way, shape, or form. So, yes, I think the answer to that question is I'm pro-choice. I don't like the I don't like the fact that the government is regulating people's bodies. That's just very icky to me. Um, you know, people should be able to do whatever they want. Just make it flexible. It doesn't, you know, and that's the thing. It doesn't impede on anybody's life. So it's like, as long as it's not impeding on me or impeding on, you know, people I love, I don't care. Right? You do your thing. I don't care. Cool. You got an abortion? Nice. You know, I don't think we'll ever get to the point where we're like, you know, we're singing like Glee musicals of like, I just got an abortion, and you're like holding the Planned Parenthood confirmation sign. No, we're not going to get to that point. You know, abortion is a traumatic experience, I feel like, for a lot of people. And but yeah, I feel like it's an important issue to talk about. And in terms of my thoughts, very simple: pro-choice. Yeah, that's about it. That's all I have to say, really. And yeah, that's all I got. 58 minutes on the clock. We almost did it under an hour, so that's pretty good. Hope you guys enjoyed this episode. If you guys enjoy these like news episodes, let me know. I'd love to dig into more. Changavi show should be coming out next. It's gonna be episode 10. Yes, so that should be fun. We're doing it for 10 weeks. It's been hell of fun. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this news episode. First episode of the Changavi Report: to abort or not to abort? That is the question. And so, yeah, I had a lot of fun recording this. I had a lot of fun making this. Appreciate all of you who stuck with me till the end. Hope you guys have a great day. Hope everything's good with you. And I will see you on the next episode of the Changavi Show, and a podcast coming out very, very soon. I don't know about later this week, but very, very soon. All right, guys, I'm out. That's all I got. Peace.